Welcome back to The World This Week with me, Phil Rees. Well, almost 150,000 US and Allied troops are now in Afghanistan, some 30,000 more than the number of Soviet troops at the height of their occupation in the 1980s. The US-led International Security Assistance Force, known as ISAF, is now at the pinnacle of its strength, which is expected to start declining one way or another by the end of the year. President Obama said for the first time last Saturday that he wants US troops out of major combat in Afghanistan by the end of 2014. Britain has already announced that it intends to pull its forces out from the country by the end of that year. The core of the West's strategy, therefore, is to build and train an Afghan national army, which will take over from Western forces and ensure the survival, they think, of the state and prevent the Taliban taking over. So, are we now at the beginning of the end phase of the war? Well, if the past week is anything to go by, there's a great deal to do. On Sunday night, there was a mass breakout from a jail in southern Afghanistan. Nearly 500 inmates, mostly Taliban fighters, escaped through a 1-kilometer tunnel dug underground. Earlier today, Afghan police arrested the prison governor and fellow police officers, saying there were signs it was an inside job. Then yesterday, an Afghan Air Force pilot shot dead 8 US soldiers after an argument. Well, here's Daphne Hacker with more.
Hi. On Wednesday, an Afghan pilot killed 8 NATO members and 1 civilian at Kabul airport. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack, saying that the Soviet-trained pilot was a secret agent of Taliban rebels. This rogue incident underscores the country's instability in the aftermath of the Monday's mass jailbreak at Sarposa prison. This is the tunnel through which nearly 500 Taliban fighters and commanders escaped the high-level security prison on the outskirts of the southern city of Kandahar. In the morning, Afghan and foreign troops formed a wide security zone around the jail. Forces were instructed to search for barefoot suspects after the escapees had all left their shoes in the prison.
Right now, the situation is under control, and we've blocked the area.
A team of 18 insurgents on the outside are believed to have been involved in the Taliban's Great Escape. According to a Taliban spokesman, the outside group spent 5 months digging a 1,000-feet tunnel through the soil into Sarposa prison. To compound the humiliation of the Afghan government, the prison managers appear to have been totally unaware of the escape. In fact, they only discovered that the detainees were gone at sunrise on Monday, half an hour after the last inmate had set off down the tunnel. Suspicions were immediately roused that the escape plot must have had support from prison guards to succeed, due to the level of planning and the time which it took the prisoners to leave the jail. Wahid Omar, a government spokesperson, described it as a disaster that should have never happened.
This prison escape is very bad news for the government and people of Afghanistan. It shows enormous vulnerability in the Afghan government.
Analysts said the freeing of hundreds of Taliban members was enough to destabilize precarious gains that the NATO troops had made after months of heavy fighting. More than 100 Taliban commanders are now coming back to help coordinate the fights around Kandahar. The escape has raised serious questions about the Afghan security forces and also drew comparisons to a similar incident 3 years earlier. In 2008, Taliban insurgents blew open the gate of the Sarposa prison at night, allowing up to 1,000 inmates to escape. Wednesday's shooting at the Kabul airport and the prison outbreak add an unwelcome dimension to the mission in Afghanistan. Under the transition program, Afghan forces will begin taking over from NATO troops this summer and should have control of the whole country by the end of 2014. The biggest question now will be how this latest incident will affect the struggle for Kandahar province and the rest of Afghanistan's turbulent south in the critical months to come. Daphne Hacker, Islam Channel.
Daphne Hacker with that report. Well, we're joined in the studio by Shashank Joshi from the Royal United Services Institute, and also the journalist and author James Ferguson, who's written widely on Afghanistan, including the books Taliban and A Million Bullets, the real story of the British Army in Afghanistan. And finally, we have on the phone from Kabul, Yorit Kaminga, the director of the Policy Research at the International Council on Security and Development. Well, let me start with you, Shashank Joshi, with the prison break. Not a sign that the authorities have, in a way, a grip on the country. I mean, do you read very much into this?
Yes, I think we should. I mean, first of all, Kandahar is the central point of focus for Western forces in Afghanistan, in a way. The practicalities of this are very serious. This is not the first prison breakout from this prison. The last time this occurred, it resulted in an enormous uptick in violence, which will have to be contained. But more than that, what it signifies is to the residents, those in Kandahar, those elsewhere in Afghanistan, is that the government not only doesn't have control over key facilities, but its key personnel, its security personnel, cannot be trusted and are on the wrong side. And for those who are thinking of swinging onto the government side, this is a sign that the momentum is not with the Karzai regime.
James, I mean, would you share that view? Would you say that this is a significant sign that basically the Karzai regime has not necessarily got the loyalty of key players in the Afghan National Army, or indeed other aspects of the regime?
Well, this is a matter for the Afghan police, of course, and this was the people we saw. Which I know something about, and indeed I went on patrol with the Kandahar police in 2007. And they've had terrible trouble. The police chief that recently was assassinated down there, it's a revolving door. People get appointed there and moved on to other parts of the country. There seems to be no continuity in the leadership of the Afghan National Police in Kandahar. And perhaps this is one of the things that results. But I think it's the symbolism of all of this that is the most important. Of course, the practical aspects of what this will do to the fighting down there, it will have an effect. I'm quite sure of that number of fighters. But the propaganda value of this is absolutely enormous. What does this say to the Afghan people? It's a brilliant, brilliant publicity coup, this. Just before the spring fighting season, this many people to do it again in the same prison as before, with such superb, you have to say, superb organisational skills to get that many people out as they did. It just runs rings around NATO and NATO's publicity campaign themselves. It beats.
Well, I mean, viewers may not know, but I think it was in July of 2008 that a suicide bomber blew open the Kandahar jail, and in fact, millions and millions were spent to secure it, and of course, the Taliban just dug underneath. I mean, on that point, is it really a fact that nobody knows who to trust? Is that a central problem now for the West and any, police, the army, etc.?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of policemen. I mean, we constantly make the mistake in the West. We talk about infiltration, for example, into the prison. The idea that somehow the Taliban physically put operatives into the jail to mingle with the prison workers. I've never really seen it quite as in quite such black and white terms. The Taliban are not just a militia, a force like that.
They're not an alien force. They are part of the people there, are they, rather than the foreign soldiers, actually.
Correct. And to be a member of the Taliban is as much a state of mind as it is to be a part of a force. And so it's an argument. We need to be winning arguments as much as winning battles. And that we're still not doing. In the civilian political sphere, we're still losing.
You're at Kaminga. You're in Kabul. What's been the effect of this news this week? It must be fairly dispiriting for people like yourself.
Yes, well, the situation here is remarkably calm if you look at those incidents, and of course also the attack at the Ministry of Defense. And actually, if you're working here, you just hear it probably just like on the other side of the world. You just suddenly hear the news, and then you go like, okay, I'm actually in the same city. Like for example, the airport shooting just suddenly is there, and you're in a different part of town. So it's definitely people start talking about it. All the Afghans, colleagues that we have, start talking about it. But indeed, it shows that it's a number of big incidents, small incidents. And indeed, it definitely shows that talking about transition, talking about training, not only of border guards, not only of prison guards, police officers, etc. There's still a lot of work to do. And we're faced with this transition calendar, which is actually a political calendar. And that's all very nice to do. And that's now we have this first districts that start to transition in the beginning of July. And among those are districts in the south and in Kandahar and Helmand province. So you're faced with a political calendar of troop withdrawal while actually the training of the AMA and the ANP, the police and the army, is really lacking behind. So it's very difficult to really have a realistic view on whether we can suddenly transition from July onwards.
Say that basically the Taliban are, and in fact they certainly reflect, many sort of a view within the Pashtun population, that in fact, the Western perception that they are some kind of other force, that they're attacking the normal people there is actually a misplaced and misunderstood assessment. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say it is. It's a lot of people actually always keeping options open, especially in the south. They have been going through a lot of different rulers, different governors, different sides that they have to choose from. So I think they're very pragmatic when it comes to new rulers or change of allegiance. And basically, why should they choose for NATO-ISAF? Because of the fact that NATO-ISAF doesn't even explain very well why we have come here. Many people don't even know, for example, about 9/11. That's one of the biggest results of our field research findings, the last couple of research rounds. And still, there's this huge gap between the people and what we try to do for them, the policy that we are trying to implement. So we really should do a much better job at explaining why we're there and why we're leaving when the time is right.
But I mean, don't you think that the Taliban also reflect the culture, the Pashtunwali culture of certainly the Pashtun people, if not those of other parts of Afghanistan, and they reflect that in a way that the West doesn't, and therefore what's the West actually trying to do there?
It's true. Actually, we hear a lot of people that we interview here in Kabul, but also in the south and in the north, where we do our research with ICOS. A lot of people are actually saying, well, to a certain extent, we like your ideas, such as democracy and human rights, etc., but we don't like the way you are imposing it. We don't like the way you, with your presence here, military but also even reconstruction, we don't like the way you are trying to impose those ideas on us.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you for that. We'll come back to you later. I mean,